Week 1, I was just guessing. Week 2, I have all the answers. I know everything that's going to happen. And of course, these will be 100% accurate and I won't need to update them at all as the week goes on. Starting with our first overall player, Derrick Henry. Now, if you're new to this channel, I have loved Derrick Henry for a long time. I have always known that Derrick Henry was going to be the running back to break the age trend. I've always known that Derrick Henry is special and nobody else on this planet can come close to my true king. We saw week 1 in a game in which I believe the Buffalo Bills were favored. Derrick Henry still dropped about 30 fantasy points. You had 169 rushing yards off of 18 carries, almost 10 yards per carry, multiple touchdowns, and he even had a reception out of the backfield. And now what's so beautiful about this week is you're going up against the Cleveland Browns, the largest spread in the NFL is at 11 points. I mean, the Baltimore Ravens are supposed to just absolutely stomp Cleveland, and they should be able to run the ball over and over and over again. Now, sportsbooks were telling us to be very concerned with the Lions offense last week. They had given the Lions offense a lower implied team total than we had seen through the previous 2 seasons. And I'm starting to think that's maybe just a factor of the Green Bay Packers defense is elite, because we see this week that sportsbooks are actually telling us, no, the Lions, they're not completely done. They have an implied team total of 26 points and they're supposed to be a top 3 scoring offense on the week. So if I look at Jahmyr Gibbs from last week and say, okay, well, he just had 10 receptions and now all of a sudden the Lions offense can be good. He does have the ceiling to be the number 1 overall running back in a full PPR format, and he's for sure still a tier 1 option. Now, the guy that I would absolutely love, and I mean I would love to rank out 1, is my RB1 on my team, Saquon Barkley. However, this is a really tough matchup going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Sportsbooks had projected the Philadelphia Eagles to be the highest scoring offense in the NFL last week at about 28 points, but now that it's dropped down to an implied team total of only 22.5, and the Eagles shouldn't project to be able to just run the ball over and over and over again, and Jalen Hurts may have to throw here, similar to what we saw with Justin Herbert in this game last week. Now, McCaffrey will be our next running back. I was initially planning on having Christian McCaffrey as the running back 1 overall in the rankings, because you go back a week ago and McCaffrey had 32 total opportunities. Just his usage as a receiver would have made him a borderline top 12 wide receiver last week. But this week, it looks like you're going to have no Kittle. You're going to have no Brock Purdy. So instead of the Niners projecting to be one of the best offenses in the league, they project to be more so a middling offense. Now, they still are favored over the New Orleans Saints. Doesn't matter if you're going to have Mac Jones. Doesn't matter if you're going to have Brock Purdy. So CMC's a jam regardless. Bijan Robinson, of course, is going to be a jam as well. It's just going to be a really tough matchup going up against the Minnesota Vikings, where the Atlanta Falcons project to score significantly less than any other running back in tier 1. And you actually look at what we had last week, and you did only have 19 total opportunities for Bijan Robinson. Obviously, had the long receiving touchdown, so he kind of made his money there. Now, going down to our next tier, I want to put Chase Brown as a tier 1 running back. Sportsbooks are not concerned at all with how bad the Cincinnati Bengals were in the second half of last game, because right now the Bengals project to be the second highest scoring offense on the week. You have a really strong matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. While yes, the Jags defense made Bryce Young look very bad last week, it's probably a factor of Bryce Young just being very bad. I don't know if it's inherently the Jags defense being special. And Chase Brown had every single carry for the Cincinnati Bengals last week, and I see no reason why that's going to change this week. Going over and looking at Josh Jacobs, the Green Bay Packers are supposed to just be a phenomenal team because they're actually favored here quite a lot over the Washington Commanders. And Jacobs last week had 19 carries. The efficiency was really bad. This is the running back 2 on my own fantasy team. So obviously I want to root for our guy. They're telling us that this team should be able to run the ball in the second half. I'm concerned that you didn't have the receiving role, however. Now with Josh Jacobs, I am considering putting him in to have fewer than 16 fantasy points in a half PPR format in my Underdog Pick'em on Thursday. We're going to do another Flock Pick'em pack for you to tail and lose money, because there is nobody worse on this planet than I am with it. Let me know if y'all would want Josh Jacobs in there, higher, lower, 16.5 points. Or if you would rather us go Jaden Reed, higher, lower, 43.5 receiving yards. Or if you would prefer instead us to be looking at somebody like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, higher, lower, 42.5 rushing yards. Again, there's nobody worse on the planet than yours truly at Pick'ems. So I would like to hear your opinion in the comment section. But if any of those pick'ems are interesting to you, they're all on Underdog Fantasy. The link to Underdog Fantasy is in the description and the comment section. If you sign up with code FLOCK, after you play your first $5, you're actually going to get $50 added into your account, and it would be the #1 way to support this channel. Now, it looked like the Miami Dolphins were the worst offense in the NFL last week, and it looked like Tua was the worst starting quarterback in the league. Now, y'all know I am always one to take a look at projections going into the future from reliable resources rather than just trying to copy and paste what occurred last week to this week. If we were just copying and pasting what occurred last week to this week, I would be crapping my pants with Achan. Because again, the Dolphins looked like they were dysfunctional, looked like they could not do anything, and Achan only had 11 total opportunities. Now, of course, he saves his day with the efficiency plus the receiving touchdown. He's very good at football. But what we are actually seeing right now is sportsbooks project that we are going to have a massive bounce back for this Dolphins offense, very similar to the Cincinnati Bengals, where they actually project to score more points than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where Bucky Irving will be our next running back. I have Bucky ranked ahead of Devon Achane rest of season. I think that the Houston Texans defense is going to be a little bit tougher to go up against, but Bucky Irving did play 76% of the snaps for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week, which was significantly higher than what we saw at any point last year. He had never played that kind of snap rate before, so it goes to show exactly how excited you should be for Bucky Irving. Jonathan Taylor will be our next name. With Jonathan Taylor, he's much higher than this in my rest of season ranks, but you all of a sudden go up against one of the toughest defenses in the league, as opposed to last week, you had one of the easiest matchups in the NFL. So going up against the Denver Broncos will scare me slightly. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we are going to have Alvin Kamara. Now, with Kamara, of course, you're looking at a running back that projects to be one of the worst offenses in the league, but that's going to be the case every single week. Of course, you knew that when you drafted him. He had 79% of the snaps. What I'm concerned with, however, is Spencer Rattler threw the ball like over 40 times. And this looks to be a consistent trend across the entire NFL. But these running backs aren't drawing targets. I don't know why. We go back 3-4 years ago. Like Alvin Kamara would have been a running back that is seeing 9 targets, 8 targets, or at least like 6 targets in a game. But over 40 pass attempts, and you have a total of 2 targets for 12 receiving yards for Kamara. So the receiving usage is going to be a little bit of a concern. And if that continues to go in the wrong way, I will move him down dramatically. Ashton Jeanty will be our next running back. Ashton Jeanty is a rookie that played 86% of the snaps last week. Now, he had 2 yards per carry. He had 1 yard per target. So the efficiency was horrendous. He was getting hit behind the offensive line on every single touch effectively. And going up against the Los Angeles Chargers, we actually saw a week ago the Kansas City Chiefs not really be able to establish a run against this defense. But again, I'm going to give Jeanty the benefit of the doubt. I think that he's an elite talent. Again, he had more yards after contact in week 1 than you did actual total rushing yards. Now, James Conner will be our next back. With James Conner, only 65% of the snaps, and you actually had Trey Benson with a considerable amount of work, and at the same time, Trey Benson was way more efficient. You had James Conner with 3.25 yards per carry and only 1.25 yards per target. However, James Conner is still the 3-down running back until we see otherwise. Doesn't matter if he's in year 8 of his NFL career. It doesn't matter if he's 30 years old. While I do think that the efficiency slowdown may increase Trey Benson's role as the season goes on, we're in week 2 right now, so he is just going to be an auto lock. James Cook will be our next running back. With James Cook, last week you had him playing in a game in which there were a total of 80 points scored. Now, I think probably you have less points scored overall, but that may lead to James Cook actually being able to run the ball more himself. So in reality, I think you can move James Cook all the way up to like 11 in these rankings. All the running backs inside the top 15 of the rankings this week, like including Kyron Williams. I see Kyron Williams at running back 15 and I go, hell, he just played 82% of the snaps. He's like the only running back in the NFL over the past 3 seasons now that's averaging over an 80% snap rate. And at the same time, you have the Rams comfortably favored over the Tennessee Titans, a defense where we saw the Denver Broncos be able to run all over them a week ago. So I look at this and go, well, it seems like we are crazy low on Kyron Williams. But then I look at all the other running backs in the tier. I'm like, hey, all these guys are really exciting as well. So there's just a lot of top end running backs in fantasy this year that I think you can feel comfortable with. Now, my running back 3 in the Flock League, who was on my bench last week, thank God we won anyway. We took down Sal. You're going to hear me say it 1,000 times. It's the proudest moment of my life. but is Travis Etienne. With Travis Etienne, he was on my bench because I didn't know what to expect. Again, the Jacksonville Jaguars were telling us, like, oh, Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, their co-starters, blah, blah, blah. Well, Tank Bigsby's gone. Travis Etienne last week, 143 rushing yards off of only 16 carries. Now, of course, yes, a lot of that's fueled with a big play, but he got a total of 19 opportunities. And I know it was a very easy matchup against the Carolina Panthers, but now you get to go up against the Cincinnati Bengals. And you actually have really good projection here for the Jags offense as well, where you have an implied team total of 23 points. Now, Amari Hampton will be our next back. With Hampton, I think we had him lower in the rankings last week than we do now, but he played 80% of the snaps and had 17 opportunities. Now, the efficiency was really bad. It was a really tough matchup in Brazil, his first NFL game ever. This matchup should be a lot better. This matchup, you're going up against the Raiders, and the Chargers at the same time project almost score 25 points this week. So I know they're telling us Najee Harris may be more involved, which honestly could be true, right? Najee Harris, before last week's game, had like 2 total practices with the team, which is why I was comfortable with Amari Hampton, which is why we thought he was going to be a 3-down workhorse. But even if Najee's more involved, maybe Najee sees 2 touches, which would double his involvement from last week. Maybe he sees 3 touches, which would triple his involvement from last week. But still, Hampton looks like the locked and loaded starter until we see otherwise. Very similar to Tony Pollard, right? Tony Pollard's also a guaranteed 3-down workhorse. Tony Pollard actually played 89% of the snaps. Now, Pollard only had 1 target, which is a little bit concerning. And also with Pollard, I just don't know if he's as good as Hampton. And his offense is going to be a hell of a lot worse. You actually have the Tennessee Titans projected yet again to be a bottom 5 offense in the league this week with an implied team total of 18.5 points and a tough matchup going up against the Los Angeles Rams. Now, our next running back will be Breece Hall. With Breece Hall, you're going up against the Buffalo Bills, where you can say, yes, Derrick Henry went nuclear against them last week, but Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry. And while the Jets got into a shootout and while the Jets look like one of the best offenses in the league last week, the reality of the situation is it's a 1-week sample. Sportsbooks are now telling us that the Jets project to be in the bottom 5 offenses in the league this week. So for me, I think if we look at the long sample size of 2 separate things, 1, the New York Jets, we can go back 20 years. And 2, Justin Fields, where we can go about 5 years back. If we look at all of those samples, I would be comfortable saying that more likely than not, the Jets are a bad offense. Now, Breece Hall definitely has a much larger role than we thought of. He had 23 total opportunities. He played 58% of the snaps. So I would like to start Breece, but I don't know if this Buffalo Bills defense is actually bad against the run. I think maybe it was just the Derrick Henry thing. Now, going over to our next tier, these are like running backs that I'm comfortable with the volume. I'm just a little shaky with their offenses. DeAndre Swift had every single touch for the Chicago Bears running back room last week. I mean, Kyle Monangai had 1 target. I know everybody in the chat was screaming, oh, DeAndre Swift so bad. Oh, it's Kyle Monangai's season in the live stream I hosted after the game. But I had to just make sure we were all on the same page and address the fact that DeAndre Swift, 100% of the opportunities, he's the guy until we see otherwise. Now, the Detroit Lions defense was pretty good against Josh Jacobs last week. But if you're going to get this type of raw volume, I think you have to play Swift and not play him over Chuba Hubbard. Because realistically, you look at Chuba Hubbard, and it's not like Hubbard doesn't have the touches. But while Caleb Williams isn't the most exciting quarterback in the world at this point of his NFL career, he's at least better than Bryce Young. I mean, we've been talking about this, but we've seen with Bryce Young now, him play about 30 NFL games. And for about 26 of those weeks that he's played, he's been the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. Now, for about 4 of them, he was good. And what's funny about it is the 4 weeks that he was good, they were all back to back to back to back at the end of the season. So people thought that, oh, okay, that's who Bryce Young is now. And they ignored the other 90% of the games where he was the worst QB in the NFL. It looks like he's back to being garbage. This offense projects to be horrible. They project score fewer points than the Giants this week. The Dallas Cowboys actually project score a ton, right? And we go back and we look at Javonte against the Philadelphia Eagles, which I understand, yes, you're missing one of your top defensive linemen, but still, the Eagles, tough matchup. Javonte plays 77% of the snaps, has multiple targets out of the backfield, and has multiple touchdowns as well. But if I'm looking at this game, I think you could be comfortable starting Javonte because they are heavily favored over the Giants. So there's a good chance that they could just run the ball this game. Now, Tyron Tracy will be on the other end of this. Now, with Tracy, I'm honestly rooting on his downfall. And it's because I currently have Cam Skattebo on my bench. and I would hope that he takes over so I can eventually use him. And I'm not going to blame everything here on Tracy. I'm not going to try to tell you like, oh, Tyrone Tracy's bad because this one singular performance. Of course not. But I do want to point out that Tyrone Tracy had 2.4 yards per carry last week, and he had 2.2 yards per target. I do want to point out that Tyrone Tracy was a worse prospect coming into the NFL than Cam Scatterbo. And I do want to point out as well that this offense still projects to be one of the worst in the league. So not that excited with Tracy, but the volume is pretty safe. He played 74% of the snaps a week ago. Now, the next tier of running backs that we have, these are like committee players that you just kind of got to pick your horse in them. We got J.K. Dobbins going up against the Indianapolis Colts. While you did have the Colts defense looking great against Tua last week, that's not necessarily going to be the case every week. The Denver Broncos offense projects out to be just fine. And we saw that J.K. Dobbins is for sure the lead back in Denver for the time being. Trevion Henderson's not the lead back in New England. And honestly, maybe this is wish casting that I'm doing here with Trevion. But for me to look at Trevion Henderson versus Ramondre Stevenson, to see the prospect profiles coming into the NFL, to see the historical efficiency that you've had with Ramondre, to see the efficiency that we've had with Trevion, both in the preseason as well as week one. If I was betting on someone, especially the guy that's actually going to catch the passes, I would assume that Trevion actually expands his role as time goes on. Kenneth Walker is a really tough matchup. You actually have the Seattle Seahawks projected to be a bottom 3 offense in the NFL this week. And while I completely understand, yes, the New York Jets and Breece Hall were great a week ago, and this game turned out to be a shootout, just because it happened one week doesn't mean that's the new norm. I think this is going to be a tough defense to go up against. And Kenneth Walker did split the backfield effectively 50-50 with Charbonnet last week. Now, David Montgomery, obviously kind of the first and second down back to Jahmyr Gibbs operating on third downs at this point. The offense projects to be much, much better here against the Chicago Bears. So you could move Montgomery up in expectations. For me, Isaiah Pacheco's not startable until we see otherwise. Pacheco had 8 opportunities a week ago. 8. The last time Isaiah Pacheco scored 10 fantasy points was in week 2 of last season. The last time Isaiah Pacheco scored 20 fantasy points was 2023. You have a tough matchup going up against Philly as well. Now, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt's my running back 4. And honestly, I may end up starting him in my second flex spot. A lot of this is going to hinge on Austin Eckler, who popped up on the injury report early in the week. If Eckler was out, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt will be a must-start running back. My hesitation is right now, technically, this is a 3-man running back by committee where you're getting some Jeremy McNichols involved. Obviously, I'm going to hope that I can continue to move Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt up these weekly rankings every single week to where he's eventually just a locked and loaded must-start player regardless. But for the time being, I think that is maybe a little bit aggressive to project out. Now, Jaylen Warren will be our next guy. Jaylen Warren, technically the lead back in Pittsburgh a week ago, but at the same time, him being the lead back in what could be a 3-man running back by committee gave him 45% of the snaps. Kind of got lucky to get the receiving touchdown. Austin Eckler, again, I think that he is maybe the lead back if you're looking at the receiving usage, but still going to be a little bit concerned, and he popped up on the injury report. Looking at Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason is the first and second down running back, it looks like, in Minnesota, and is going to get some goal line involvement, but nothing as a receiver. Whereas Aaron Jones, on the other hand, while he had fewer opportunities, he was the guy to come away with the receiving touchdown, and he had 3 targets out of the backfield. And the reality is, probably not wanting to start any running backs in this tier as they're all looking to be in committees. Nick Chubb's not in a committee. I have Nick Chubb as well on my team, but I plan on keeping him on the bench for now. We know that 1, this offensive line is not the best. 2, we know at the same time that Nick Chubb has no receiving upside at this point of his NFL career. We had 0 receptions last week off of only 1 target, played 51% of the snaps and only scored 6 fantasy points. RJ Harvey, I really like him in the long term. I think he will be the back in the long term over J.K. Dobbins, but RJ Harvey only played 29% of the snaps this past week. With Zach Charbonnet here, I understand that you probably want to have him much higher than this. And if you look at just the usage that we had a week ago, Zach Charbonnet was right up there with 58% of the snaps. He actually played more than Kenneth Walker did. But again, I'm going to look at the large sample that we have going back over the past 2 seasons. And I know it's not the exact same situation, but we do have a large sample for Walker playing over Charbonnet. So I don't want to just change that 2-year history off of 1 week. Looking at Dylan Sampson, Quinshon Judkins back-to-back here. Judkins is back at practice. I do not want to start either guy. They project to be in the worst offense in the NFL this week. If I had to pick one, I would be going with Dylan Sampson, especially knowing that they're going to be trailing Baltimore, and I think Dylan Sampson's the receiving back. Rhamondre Stevenson technically is the starting running back for the New England Patriots at this point, but he is a legitimate bum. Yes, he played 65% of the snaps last week, but at the same time, you had 2.14 yards per carry and 4 yards per target. How long do we have to see this guy fail? Trey Benson, I think I would love him to have a big spike week for all the underdog best ball teams I've drafted him in. But the fact of the matter is, it's probably very difficult to project him to be somebody in your starting lineup where he only played 33% of the snaps a week ago. Now, if you're looking at the rankings and you want to say, Mason, you are an idiot, Jacory Krosky-Merritt is way better than this, I got great news for you. For Thursday night, his higher lower on Underdog Fantasy is 7.25 fantasy points. If you think he's going to be great, by all means, go out there and take the higher, but I'd be a little bit nervous about it. If you did want to pick him on Underdog Fantasy, it's available in almost every state, and the link is in the description and comment section. And when you use code FLOCK, after you play your first $5, you're going to get $50 added in your account, and it's the number one way that you can support this show. But I really appreciate you, and I really hope I get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.